And we are back once again here on Hockey Talk on 88.9 FM, WNYO, the voice of Oswego. And right now, the timing is absolutely perfect because we have on the phone line a very, very special guest. This gentleman won 2 Stanley Cups as a player with the Philadelphia Flyers in 1974 and 75, was a 2-time All-Star with the Atlanta Flames, ended his career in 1982 with the Calgary Flames, was a color analyst with Gary Thorne on ESPN, former in-game analyst for Versus, is the current in-game analyst for the Philadelphia Flyers. Joining us now is the one and only Mr. Bill Clement. Mr. Clement, how are you doing today?
I'm doing awesome, thank you. I got a little time to cut the lawn. I don't have to work a hockey game today. Life is good.
Well, first of all, just thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Always like talking hockey, especially with the guys that really care about it. I hope that's you, right?
Of course it is.
That's me. I call the play-by-play on the radio for the Oswego State Lakers home games, and we got the sports director of the station here as well.
Yep.
Oh, that's awesome.
All right, my first question has to be, like I said before, you played in the NHL from 1971-72, your rookie season with the Flyers, all the way up until 1982, your last year with Calgary. From what you've seen, how much has the game changed between when you played in the late 70s and the early 80s to right now?
Oh, light years. I mean, the game's even changed so much from 2004 till now, because with the rules changes coming out of the lockout and taking the red line out, the game kind of has been resuscitated. It went from sort of an open-style game when I played to the late 80s, early 90s, and then in the mid-90s when the trap was introduced, to a game that very often when I was announcing I found was like watching paint dry, to be honest with you. I mean, some games, all of the different analysts from the different networks would walk out of the booth after the period ended, and I remember this in 2003 when the Anaheim Ducks met the New Jersey Devils in the Stanley Cup Final. We'd look at one another and we'd go, what was that? Like, this is the Stanley Cup Final. So sweeping changes opened the game back up, and I think it's closer now to what it was like than when I played. The dark days of the NHL, to me, were from about 1995 to 2004, when everybody just focused on trapping and playing Team D. All of the teams kind of looked the same. All of the players looked the same. And it wasn't really a fun time, even as a broadcaster, to watch it. But it's back in big form now and pretty close to the way it was when I played.
Well, I want to ask your thoughts on the headshot rule that was put into place, in the middle of the season, because kind of it had to. It was by necessity. Of course, the official rule is now a lateral back pressure or blindside hit to an opponent where the head is targeted and or principal point of contact. So do you think, the NHL's, it's becoming too soft, or do you think it's better now? Not as much physical play as back when you played. Fighting's kind of more staged now, it seems.
Well, you know what? The game's cleaned up in a fighting sense, and usually it's only the fighters that fight, and I still think there's a role for them. But I think there are more violent hits now than there were when I played, and that's why the NHL had to create some kind of legislation to protect guys' heads. That rule was worded very carefully, and you just defined it well. Almost every team has guys back checking through the middle, so they're only 10 and 15 feet very often from a guy coming, on the attack that'll make a pass and then make a sharp turn right into a hit. And even if it's a clean hit, like the Mike Richards hit on David Booth, Mike Richards of the Flyers and David Booth of the Florida Panthers, by rule standards, it was a clean hit. But players today are so capable of delivering ruthless hits, even if they're clean, that the league had to do something about it. Also, the hitting from behind now, there's a very low tolerance for that with the refs and with the NHL. So as the stakes seem to be raised and players who are really, it's demanded of the players by their coaches that they finish every hit. The league has to do something to make sure that the players are protected, because just assuming that the players are going to respect one another enough not to knock another player out will never happen. I mean, you're competing with everything you have to win the hockey game, even if it means the health and welfare of the guy you're playing against. So I love the fact that the NHL was able to legislate this during the season. Usually it would wait till the end of the season, but they saw a need to do it now, and I'm just all in favor. Look, when we start cannibalizing our own sport with players hurting one another on hits that could be avoided, you're taking away ultimately from what the product is all about, and that's entertaining the fans. You got really good players sitting on the sidelines with concussions, and that had to be at least minimized, and that's what the NHL decided to do.
All right, let's get down to business of talking about what's currently going on in the NHL right now, and that's the Stanley Cup playoffs. Your opinion so far through the first, I'd say, round and a half of the playoffs, what's been the biggest surprise so far?
Well, it was kind of interesting. The West followed the script, with all of the top teams moving along, the Sharks and Detroit and Chicago and Vancouver. The East was just the other way around with the top 3 seeds getting knocked out. Bar none, the big surprise is the Montreal Canadiens.
Right.
It's one thing for them to do what they did to the Washington Caps, which I thought was the impossible once they went down 3-1. But then to fight their way back into the series against Pittsburgh after losing Game 1, then Montreal wins Game 2, they lose Game 3, they win Game 4. You keep shaking your head and going, well, how the hell are they doing that? Well, they're doing it with 2 things. I mean, superhuman performances from Jaroslav Halak in goal. And I really thought that in Game 4, and I said, look, Montreal will not win Game 4 unless Halak is able to put on another magic show. And in volume, he didn't make as many saves, but he was still brilliant when he had to be. So without a doubt, every team during the regular season shows flashes of brilliance, but hardly any teams are able to sustain. Right. And Montreal was one of the most inconsistent teams. So what's really amazing is that they've been able to sustain when they've needed to, like the 3 consecutive wins against Washington, and then play, except for Game 1 in the Pittsburgh series, play pretty darn well, and now have that series deadlocked at 2. Their consistency right now has me shaking my head, especially the consistency of Jaroslav Halak.
Now, I want to know your thoughts on the Flyers. I know you covered them a lot over the years, obviously played for them. They, in 5 games, one of the probably the second biggest shocker after the Canadiens, in 5 games taking down the heavily favored New Jersey Devils. Now they find themselves down in a 3-1 hole after winning last night to Boston. How come they've done so well? I don't think anybody picked them to get by New Jersey.
Well, against New Jersey, a couple of things. They had New Jersey's number during the regular season. They went 5-1 against New Jersey, and I think that counted for something. But the Flyers outcompeted the Devils, and that's you hardly ever see that. That says something about the Flyers, something positive. And Brian Boucher, next to Jaroslav Halak, is the biggest story of the playoffs, because Brian Boucher, 2 weeks before the season ended, you thought he wouldn't even be able to play in the American League. And he turned his game around, including winning that shootout last game of the season to make the playoffs, and that game was against the New York Rangers. So he's a huge story, but there's, you always ask yourself when you look at a game or a series, well, how much of that win was the team that won, and how much of that win can we attribute to the team that lost? And in the Flyers-Devils series, I think while the Flyers outcompeted the Devils, it was really strange to see the Devils look like a team that almost laid down when it came time to really step up, as the Devils teams have always done in the past. So, no, the Flyers look really good. Can't take anything away from them. But a lot of us were shaking our heads saying, what's going on with the Devils? Ilya Kovalchuk, but then Ilya Kovalchuk, and I said this on, XM radio a couple of times, Ilya Kovalchuk does what a lot of Russian players do. And I think Evgeny Malkin's doing that in the Pittsburgh series. He turns Russian, meaning that the gifted Russian players so often, when they're up against it, when their team is up against it, they try to get it done by themselves. And they really stop being team players in a sense of give and goes, passing, combining with other players. They do what they did best that got them into the NHL as star players, and that is dazzle as individuals. But that doesn't work in the playoffs. So the Devils just weren't what they should have been, and the Flyers played to their potential.